Alright, so I figured we'll do a little video on this Harbor Freight Titanium 140 MIG. I already do have a full-size 220 MIG welder, so otherwise I would have definitely bought the 170. This is only a 145, but in a 220 it is much more powerful than this one. I mean, this thing is actually, I'm going to tell you right now, I've been pretty amazed by what this welder can do. So I'm going to go over some of the stuff that I like about it. I don't have that much that I don't like about it, so let's talk about some of this stuff. So if you're new to welding, and especially even if you're just new to this machine, it's really nice that they have this this diagram showing the different types of wire, the gauge of the metal, and what you're trying to weld. And then it shows some generic settings for that, for, you know, like 20 gauge, 18 gauge, 16 gauge, 24 gauge steel, you know, for your heat settings, and your, you know, they have this other setting here. I'm not sure, that's some sort of a I'm not sure, pulse or something like that. I really don't know that much about that knob yet, but you can use these things to kind of give you a guide to know how to set up what you want. You know, it's inductance, I guess, so whatever that is. It's because my other welder does not have that. I have two knobs. I have wire speed and heat, and that's about it for those older welders. This is an inverter welder, so that's a little bit different. Now compare this to the cheap Harbor Freight, you know, the $150 or $200 MIG welder. If you're going to buy one, I would spend the extra money to get the MIG welder, even if you're going to start out with the flux core wire. Like if you don't have the money to buy the gas yet, the gas setup, you can always find them used. Used tanks, you can find them used. Depends on where you live. If you're living somewhere, I would try and look for a local welding supply instead of using like air gas or something like that. That can be pretty expensive. But try and find, if you can find a used tank, and make sure that the places you go to will take a used tank. Some of them don't. So if that would be something, I would definitely buy this one over any of the cheaper ones. Now, I've used the cheaper ones before, and I found that they are really kind of difficult to weld with. I found the heat settings on those cheap ones aren't very good, and it seems like you have to have it turned up all the way to be able to weld sheet metal. And then if you're welding thicker stuff, I don't feel like you're getting very good penetration with them. This thing, on the other hand, this welder, it feels like you can get really good penetration even with a 110. So at on 110 volts, it can weld some pretty good thick sheet metal. If you do not have a 220 welder, since I have one, I would even suggest, if you can do it, go to the 170, 220, 110 model they have in the titanium. Because that one actually, it has the capability to do thicker steel. So that might be something to look into. Now, this has a 3 in 10 duty cycle, which is actually really good. So most of the welders, 3 in 7, most of them are 3 in 10. So that actually is pretty good as far as that goes. And if you use it on full, you will probably run into that, duty cycle, on full heat, especially on 110 welder. Use it on 220, I bet you probably wouldn't as much. But I don't know that for sure because I don't have that one. This one here, the thing I like about it is you notice that this wire feed setup is all metal. If you look at the cheap ones, they're this really, really cheap plastic. It's the ones they have at Harbor Freight. And a lot of times when you put the, this thing starts to strip out and stuff like that, where this is actually pretty well good quality made. Grounding clamp's okay, decent. The trigger isn't too bad. It feels pretty strong. It doesn't feel really, really cheap like my cheap plasma cutter. has a really cheap. I'll show you that one real quick. Here's my cheap plasma cutter. This thing feels like it's cheap too. This little cheap nozzle on or gun on it or whatever it's called. I can't remember the name. This does hold a full spool of wire, so that's kind of nice. And it actually is pretty easy to weld with. So if you set up these settings here, you'll find if you're doing sheet metal or something like that, that you can actually weld it without burning through. We will do some demo here shortly, and just hang on and we'll do some demo with this thing, show you what it can do. Alright, so I've got it turned on. I'm going to do some welding, some sheet metal. I'm going to use their factory settings, and I'm going to butt weld this sheet metal right here. These are two pieces of 20 gauge I have. This is 22 gauge. So I've seen a lot of people show welding thick metal with this. Honestly, you know, thick metal is a lot easier to weld than sheet metal. And this machine, I'm going to say, is the king of sheet metal. So if you're wondering, I mean, if you're doing any kind of restoration type of stuff, this is the welder, really, in my opinion, to have. So anyway, let's do a little butt weld here and check it out. All right, I get my gloves on, welding helmet here. Got it grounded over here. This is actually electro galvanized, so it has a zinc coating on it, so it's a little bit tougher to weld than regular cold sheet metal. Let's give it a little fighting chance. Give it a maybe time to change the tip. Hang on a second. All right, let's give it another go here. It does have a little bit of a delay when you pull the trigger to make sure it has adequate gas, so it's kind of nice. Let's say that setting's a little bit too cold, or the wire speed's a little too low. Let me turn it up a little bit. All right. If you notice, I actually just laid a whole bead on a piece of 22 gauge. Okay, so that's, I got a little bit moundy, so I could probably turn down my wire a little bit. Look at how much control you have with sheet metal with this welder. Most of them you'd have burned through. If I was using a 220 welder, you'd burn right through it. Let's try lap welding a piece of 22 with the same settings. I really don't like this part of the welder. This cap thing, had a few problems with it. And just now when I had to pull it off, notice this is one thing that I think I'm going to have to replace on this welder. Other than that, I'm very happy with it. But I've had to mess with this thing here. It seems like it's supposed to screw on, and it doesn't really very easily. Let me fix this up and I'll get back in and bring you guys back in the video. Alright, let's try this again. Yeah, that little cap, that way that thing goes on there, don't really like that much, but everything else is fine with this machine. Try this again out. Alright, so let's take a look at that. 22 gauge steel lap weld. This is not cleaned. So a lot of people show everything clean with their machine, but you're not always going to be able to get a clean clean surface. Sometimes you're not going to be able to grind it, clean it. And this thing will still, that weld will actually still hold. And that's on 22 gauge. I didn't even burn. I did burn through just a little tiny hole right there. If you can see that little tiny hole right at the very end. and I didn't spot weld it. I just ran a bead across it, and that's because my settings are the same. I didn't set them up for 22 gauge. I set them up for 20 gauge, and it still worked. So for sheet metal, if you're new to welding, this is the machine to have. In my opinion, I've tried the other welders, the ones from Harbor Freight, the cheaper ones, the ones that they call Chicago Electric ones, and they do not weld anything remotely close to how this welder welds. And again, the reason I show you guys unclean metal is because anybody can weld clean metal, okay? But if it's not clean and you can weld a bead that nice, that's a good welder. That's a good machine. If you try to do this with dirty metal on the cheaper welders, you know, like the ones compared to like the Harbor Freight MIG, you know, whatever it is, they're you know, or using a flux core welder or something like that, you're not going to get that kind of result. Okay, and that's a nice clean, barely warped it, you know, kept a nice weld on sheet metal. So let's do something else. Is that one dirty enough for you? Alright, so I got my handy dandy Bauer drill. Actually had a problem with this one and had to return it, and that's really rare. Let's clean it really. We're not going to do like a really good clean area. I'm just going to do like a semi-clean, because I think clean is not always going to be your situation. So if you're looking at super clean, yeah, it's going to weld even better than what I'm showing you. So the reason I'm showing you the crap, because I think it'll help you understand that this is a really good welder. This is a 20 gauge piece of metal. I'm going to weld this to that just to show you guys what it'll do on something really dirty. But I had to get the scaling rust off of it first. So we got to get our grounding clamp on it anyway. I don't know if I got a very good connection there. Let me try cleaning that area just a little bit. Hopefully I got a good ground. If I don't have a good ground, you aren't going to get a good weld. Let's just try putting this piece on here and see how it looks. Alright. Just put, maybe I'll put on both gloves. Roll away. Not getting a good enough ground. Hang on a second, guys. Let me clean this really good where my ground is, and I'll bring you back in. All right, let's try it again. See if we can get a spark out of this thing. What do you think? Oh yeah, we got weld now. All right, let's weld it on there. Like magic, check this out. This tells you when you got a good welder. Let's take a look. You could never do this with the cheap welder. Look at that, connected, burned right to the semi-clean surface and sticks like gold. If you see, there's really no contamination in there. I mean, what more do you want to ask for a 110 welder? This thing is the king, in my opinion. You know, I've used the cheap ones. I had one of the Cornwell. It might as well have said Harbor Freight Cornwell, and I used one of those, and I couldn't weld for crap with it. This thing here, when you're using gas, you can really do a nice job of doing whatever you want to do. It does weld the thick stuff. You've seen in other videos, it welds the thick stuff like gold. I have another video on my other channel. I actually weld dirty thick metal, and it just welds a nice, look at that bead. I mean, welds a nice bead like that. on dirty metal. So if it can do that, it can certainly weld clean metal, and you can do a lot of things with this welder. It's really a good value. This one, if you look on some of the websites, you can find a coupon when it's on special. They'll have it every once in a while where it's normally $3.99, okay, and I've seen it for $3.49 on the coupon, but it has to be a specific coupon for titanium. If you get one that's just for you know, the 20% off, you cannot use that with this to get this welder. So look for that. Find the coupon if you want to buy one. If you're new to welding and you want to weld some thicker stuff, I mean, this will weld 1/8 inch pretty nice. You could probably weld even 1/4 inch, but you're going to have to make multi-pass on that to do that. So you're going to have to weld, you know, to do multi-pass, you'll weld in the middle, then you'll do another pass over that, and then another pass over that to penetrate further into the steel. If this was metal and this was metal here, you would be wanting to do multi-pass. You can check some of the other welding videos that are out there for doing that. But I believe you could probably weld even 1/4 inch, and effectively maybe even weld thicker steel than that. The 170 will weld that a lot nicer. You'll get a lot more penetration. You'll get a better weld. You'll get something that's a lot stronger. But you know, this welder for the homeowner guy, I would say is really good. Other than this little thing here that slides on the gun, there's like a little spring type of thing here that it just slides on, versus some of them, like my other one, is threaded. I like the threaded one a lot better than this, but still, it's something you can manage. You could even, if you had to, you could just put this on and actually use a piece of tape to hold it in place if that thing started going out, and it probably would last you for years just like that. It's not really a big deal. It's not a deal breaker. The machine itself does a great job. So anyway, just a little bit about this Harbor Freight MIG 140. I would say definitely it's on the must-buy list if you are looking to do sheet metal. Even if you have an old 220 welder, I would suggest, you know, using that for the heavy stuff and bringing on one of these for the smaller stuff. It just will save you time. Yeah, this thing welds up. I've you know, holes in sheet metal. I can weld a hole up in a sheet metal. You just go around a nice circle, nice circle, nice circle, and just won't even burn through. Leaves a nice flat weld. Not a lot to grind off. Very smooth. You can tune it just right and get it just right where you want it. It's so easy to use. I'm going to tell you, I'm very, very impressed with this welder. I've used it. I did a lot of sections on this. What happened is my Century, well, it's old, you know, I've had it since 95. Finally the fan went out on it, so I was without a welder for a couple days. I was using one of the cheap Harbor Freight ones. It was not a Harbor Freight, but it was a Cornwell. Might as well have been Harbor Freight, same thing. It was like the copy of the Harbor Freight, whatever they are, the Chicago Electric welder. It has the 1-2 switch and all this. It was exactly the same thing. Probably some Chinese copy of it. I used that and it was terrible, and I was getting frustrated with it, and so I said, you know what, I'm just going to go buy one of these. The worst thing I could do is return it, and I am definitely not returning this welder. I've been using it in lieu of using this one for a lot of these things here. I did this whole section with this. This is all butt welded top. I did a lot of this stuff here. I put the floors in. We did all the edge welding, all the lap welding there. Welded up all the holes in the floor. Really went easy. Great welder. Worth every penny of the money you spend. I don't see a better value out there. I've looked at several, and I would definitely buy this again. Talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe. I don't know how long it's going to last, but you know what? If it lasts a couple years, it's worth it still. Talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.